In the heart of winter, when the world is hushed under a blanket of cold, life often feels quieter, safer. For a group of college friends gathered in Reno, Nevada, a weekend break was a welcome pause from studies, a time for laughter, skiing, and shared memories. But in the dead of one such night, as the city slept, a silence far more sinister would descend upon one house. A young woman, sleeping on a couch just feet from her friends, would vanish into the frigid air without a sound. The morning would dawn not with the smell of coffee and breakfast, but with a chilling emptiness, a mystery that would first grip a city and then stun an entire nation. This is the story of Brianna Denison, a life full of promise and the relentless hunt for a predator who walked in the shadows. Brianna Denison was a spark of light. Born on March 29, 1988, in Reno, she was a child of the mountains and the desert sky. She grew up in a loving home with her parents and a younger brother, building a world of childhood memories. That world was shaken to its core when Brianna was just 6 years old. Her father passed away suddenly, a loss so profound it could have shattered the small family. Instead, it forged an unbreakable bond. The tragedy brought Brianna and her mother even closer, and the young girl stepped up, doing everything in her power to support her family, displaying a maturity and compassion far beyond her years. She carried this spirit of resilience and curiosity with her as she grew. Brianna had an insatiable wanderlust. She wasn't content to just read about the world. She wanted to experience it firsthand. Her passport became a diary of adventures. She trekked through half of Europe, marveled at the vibrant culture of Japan, and even immersed herself completely in a new life by spending a full year in Italy as part of a student exchange program. Each journey added a new layer to her bright and engaging personality. After graduating from high school, her path led her to the sunny shores of California, where she enrolled at Santa Barbara City College. Brianna had a deep-seated desire to help others, particularly children. She dreamed of becoming a child psychologist, a career where her innate empathy and gentle nature could make a real difference in young lives. In Santa Barbara, she thrived. She built a strong circle of friends, fell in love, and was charting a course for a future that seemed limitless and bright. In the winter of 2008, a 19-year-old Brianna was on a break from her college life. She returned home to Reno, eager to reconnect with the people and places she loved. It was a time to catch up with her family and her childhood friends, to share stories of her life in California, and to simply be home. On Friday, January 18th, she packed a small bag and headed over to her best friend's house, located near the University of Nevada, Reno. The plan was simple, a classic friends weekend. Another friend was joining them, and their days were mapped out with fun, skiing on the snowy slopes by day and enjoying concerts and the city's nightlife in the evenings. Saturday, January 19th, was supposed to be a highlight. One of Brianna's favorite bands was playing a concert in town. But as the day wore on, she started to feel unwell, the telltale signs of a cold setting in. She considered staying in, but her mom, knowing how much the concert meant to her, encouraged her to go anyway, to not let a little cold spoil her fun. Brianna decided she was right. She didn't want to miss it. A few hours into the concert, however, the cold began to win. Feeling her energy drain, she decided it was best to leave a bit early and head back to her friend's house to rest, hoping to stop the cold from getting any worse. The house wasn't far, but the January night was bitingly cold, with temperatures dipping well below freezing. The last thing she wanted was a long walk in that weather. As she exited the venue, she saw a car pulling out of the parking lot. In a moment of simple trust, she approached the driver and asked for a ride. The driver agreed, and a few minutes later, she was safely dropped off at her friend's house. Inside, the house was quiet. She made herself comfortable on the living room couch, which was situated right near the kitchen area, and settled in to wait for her friends to return. They finally arrived around 3:30 in the morning, full of energy and stories from the rest of the show. The three young women chatted for a while, the comfortable rhythm of their friendship filling the late-night air. Around 4:30 a.m., their conversation wound down, and they decided to call it a night. Her friends went to a bedroom to sleep, while Brianna, already cozy, decided to stay on the couch. She sent a final text message to her boyfriend, pulled a blanket over herself, and drifted off to sleep. The next morning, around 9 a.m., her friends began to stir. As they started making breakfast, they noticed Brianna wasn't on the couch. Their first thought was simple and logical. She must have moved into the spare bedroom to get more comfortable, closing the door behind her. They didn't think much of it. About 40 minutes later, with breakfast ready, one of them walked over to the closed bedroom door and knocked gently, calling out to wake Brianna. There was no answer. She knocked again, a little louder this time. Still, only silence. A small knot of unease began to form. Finally, she turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed was untouched. A wave of confusion washed over them. They searched the entire house, calling her name, their voices echoing in the sudden, strange quiet. They quickly realized Brianna was nowhere to be found. But everything she had brought with her was still there. Her phone sat on the end table. Her purse was on the floor. Her clothes were in her bag, and even her shoes were right where she'd left them. The whole situation felt deeply wrong. It was freezing outside, a harsh, unforgiving cold. They couldn't conjure a single reason why Brianna would have walked out into that weather wearing only the t-shirt she had slept in. Panic began to set in. They called her mom, hoping she might have an explanation, but her mom had no idea where she could be. She promised to rush over immediately. In the minutes that followed, while waiting and worrying, one of the friends happened to glance at the pillow on the couch where Brianna had been sleeping. Her heart stopped. There, against the fabric, were a few small reddish-brown stains. They looked an awful lot like blood. The creeping unease exploded into sheer terror. They immediately called 911. Within minutes, the quiet morning was broken by the sound of sirens, and the house became a crime scene. When police officers arrived, they were struck by the lack of obvious disturbance. There were no overturned chairs, no shattered glass, no signs of a violent struggle inside the home. Yet, a few subtle details felt jarringly out of place. The blanket Brianna had been sleeping under was found several feet away from the couch, as if it had been thrown aside, and the small, stuffed teddy bear she had been using as an extra pillow was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks or splintered door frames. But when questioned, her friends delivered a chilling piece of information. They never locked the front door, and that unlocked door was positioned directly in front of the couch where Brianna had been sleeping. From the very first hours of the investigation, detectives began to lean heavily toward one terrifying theory. Brianna Denison had been abducted from the house as her friends slept soundly in the next room. It seemed impossible that she would have willingly walked out into the freezing night with nothing, no phone, no shoes, no coat. But the question that haunted them was how someone could have entered the house and taken her without waking anyone. The answer, it turned out, was likely on the blood-stained pillow. Forensic experts soon arrived and put together the most plausible and horrifying explanation. First, lab tests confirmed the blood on the pillow was Brianna's. Based on the pattern of the stains, they theorized that her attacker had likely pressed her face down into the pillow with immense force, simultaneously smothering her screams and causing the minor bleeding from her nose or mouth. It was a method of silencing her that was both brutal and terrifyingly effective. While the interior of the house yielded few clues, the crime lab got a major hit from the front door handle. They swabbed the knob and discovered the DNA profile of an unknown man. His genetic fingerprint wasn't in any law enforcement database, meaning he was a ghost, a nameless predator. With no other leads inside the house, the police launched a massive citywide search for Brianna. They began an exhaustive door-to-door canvass of the neighborhood, asking residents for any information and requesting that men voluntarily provide DNA samples to rule them out. Meanwhile, detectives dove into Brianna's personal life, starting with her phone. They found a string of angry text messages from her boyfriend on the night she vanished. Her friends confirmed the relationship was rocky and that the two were on the verge of breaking up. For a short time, her boyfriend was considered a person of interest, until investigators quickly confirmed his alibi He was in another state at the time of her abduction and couldn't possibly have been involved. From the very first days, Brianna's disappearance captivated Reno. It quickly became the biggest news story in the city, and soon her face was known across the country. Her photograph was plastered on billboards, and local news channels ran constant updates on the case. The community response was overwhelming. In total, police collected around 3,000 DNA samples from local men, a monumental task for the city's crime lab, which simply wasn't equipped to handle that volume. Authorities turned to the public for help, and in a testament to the city's desperation to find Brianna, they quickly raised $150,000 to fund the additional testing. Eventually, every single sample was processed. The result was heartbreaking. Not one of them matched the DNA of the suspected abductor. The FBI soon joined the investigation, bringing their extensive resources to bear. Detectives revisited every potential lead. They started with the man who had given Brianna a ride home from the concert, suspecting he might have returned later. After the media reported that police wanted to speak with him, the man came forward voluntarily. He provided a DNA sample and presented a solid alibi, clearing his name completely. Another intriguing lead came from a man who lived directly across the street from the house. He told police he suffered from insomnia and had been awake in his living room in the early hours of that morning. Around 5 a.m., he saw a shadow pass in front of his window. A moment later, he heard the distinct sound of someone trying to open his front door, jiggling the handle. After a few failed attempts, the noise stopped. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, assuming it was just a drunk person who had mistaken his house for their own. In hindsight, it was a deeply unsettling detail. With each passing day, the search for Brianna grew more frantic. Legions of volunteers joined police officers. Helicopters scanned the rugged landscape from above, while K-9 units combed through hard-to-reach places, dense forests, open fields, and dark drainage ditches. But none of it led anywhere. Based on the evidence they had, detectives strongly doubted this was the attacker's first crime. The boldness and silence of the abduction suggested a predator with experience. They began digging into other unsolved violent crimes in the Reno area and soon found two recent incidents that sent a chill down their spines. In November 2007, just 2 months before Brianna vanished, a 21-year-old college student was attacked in a university parking lot. An unknown man ran up to her, knocked her to the ground, and pulled out a gun before sexually assaulting her. He warned her to be quiet, but instead, she screamed at the top of her lungs. Her screams seemed to spook him. He jumped up and fled, dropping a pack of condoms as he ran. A month later, in December, another attack occurred. This time, the victim was a 22-year-old student standing right outside her own home. A man rushed up from behind, covering her mouth and nose with enough force to make her lose consciousness. She awoke moments later in the cab of a pickup truck. The driver pulled over in a secluded area and sexually assaulted her, ordering her not to look at him the entire time. When he was finished, he drove her back to her house and told her not to turn around as she walked to her door. She went straight to the police and was able to provide a partial description, a heavy-set white male with tanned arms. She also described his truck, adding one bizarre and chilling detail. Inside the cab, there was a single child's shoe. There was another disturbing link between these two vicious attacks. In both cases, the assailant had taken the victim's underwear with him as a twisted trophy. Investigators had collected DNA evidence from both women, and the samples from the two separate attacks matched each other. Now, detectives working Brianna's case requested a comparison. The DNA from the two prior assaults was run against the sample found on the doorknob of the house where Brianna was last seen. It came back as a perfect match. Their worst fears were now a certainty. They were hunting a serial predator who was escalating, a man who targeted young women and had now graduated from assault to abduction. Once this terrifying connection hit the news, another student came forward. She told police that one night recently, someone had tried to break into her home by yanking on the front door handle so hard that it actually bent the metal. Fortunately, whoever it was didn't manage to get inside. Using the descriptions from the two assault victims, police artists put together a composite sketch and a profile of the suspect, a man of average height, between 28 and 40 years old, with a solid, muscular build. His portrait was sent to every local newspaper and television station, accompanied by a desperate public plea for help in identifying him. A wave of panic began to spread through Reno. The phantom predator now had a face. People realized a monster was operating right under their noses, and they feared it was only a matter of time before he struck again. Sales of guns and pepper spray skyrocketed. Women across the city were terrified to stay home alone. But even with the intense public pressure and the thousands of hours poured into the investigation, police weren't any closer to making an arrest or to finding Brianna. With each day that turned into a week, the fragile hope that she might still be alive grew dimmer. Divers were sent to search the icy waters of the Truckee River for her body, joined by hundreds of volunteers who braved the freezing cold to walk the riverbanks. Police were inundated with over 5,000 tips, but every single one led to a dead end. This agonizing uncertainty dragged on for nearly a month. Then, on February 15th, police received the call they had been dreading. A construction worker was heading out for his lunch break. To save some time, he decided to cut through a vacant, overgrown lot on his way to a nearby cafe. As he walked, he spotted a discarded Christmas tree lying in a dry ditch. Something caught his eye, a pair of socks sticking out from behind the branches. Curious, he walked closer and saw what looked like a human figure. At first, he thought someone had illegally dumped a store mannequin, but as he drew nearer, the horrifying truth dawned on him. It was a body. He immediately pulled out his phone and called the police. Detectives sent the remains to the medical examiner to confirm the identity and determine the cause of death. The victim was completely naked except for the pair of socks. Lying next to the body were 2 pairs of women's underwear. The medical examiner confirmed the city's collective nightmare. It was Brianna. She had died from strangulation, and based on the ligature marks on her neck, the killer had likely used a pair of underwear to do it. The pathologist delivered another devastating blow. Brianna had probably been murdered inside her friend's house on the very night she disappeared. Her body later moved to the desolate lot. This meant she had been gone from the very beginning. As for the underwear found at the scene, 1 pair belonged to Brianna's friend from the house. She hadn't even realized they were missing. The second pair, however, was a mystery. Detectives believed the killer had deliberately left them at the scene, a sick and twisted message to taunt the police. Brianna had also been sexually assaulted, and male DNA was recovered from her body. As expected, it matched the samples from the 2 earlier assaults and the one found on the doorknob. The news that Brianna's body had been found hit Reno like a punch to the gut. Thousands of people had been following the case, clinging to the hope that she might somehow be found alive. That hope was now extinguished, replaced by grief and outrage. In the weeks that followed, police continued to work tirelessly to identify her killer, but every lead they chased ended in frustration. A few weeks later, they decided to share a specific disturbing detail with the public, revealing that the perpetrator seemed to collect his victims' underwear as trophies. They hoped that perhaps a relative, a girlfriend, or an acquaintance might have noticed something so suspicious. But no useful tips came in. From that point on, the investigation all but froze. Even with dozens of officers still assigned to the case, the trail went cold. Weeks turned into months. Despite all their efforts, it was starting to feel like the killer had vanished without a trace, that he had managed to get away with it. But everything changed on November 1st, 2008, almost a year after the murder. The police department received a call from a person who wished to remain anonymous. The caller said that a while back, her friend had made a disturbing discovery. She had found women's underwear in her boyfriend's pickup truck. When she confronted him about it, his excuse sounded flimsy and deeply suspicious, and there was more. Shortly after Brianna's murder made headlines, this man had abruptly sold his pickup truck and left town. The man's name was James Biela. Police immediately turned their full attention to the 27-year-old. James Biela was a former Marine with extensive training in martial arts. At the time of Brianna's murder, he was working various construction jobs and had spent a lot of time on projects near the university in the exact area where Brianna's friend lived. He knew the neighborhood intimately. Digging deeper, detectives uncovered a hidden history of violence. Biela's ex-girlfriend told them he had hit her multiple times and had once nearly killed someone with a knife in a violent altercation. There was also a bizarre and cruel incident where, for no apparent reason, he had broken a dog's leg. Despite all of this, James Biela had never faced any serious felony charges, which meant police had never collected his DNA. Detectives soon learned that Biela had recently moved back to Reno. They immediately put him under round-the-clock surveillance. They also gave him a call, telling him they wanted to talk. Biela agreed to meet, but strangely, didn't even bother to ask what the interview was about. The next day, he sat down with detectives. They asked him where he was on the night Brianna was killed. Biela calmly claimed he had been at his girlfriend's place, but when they asked him to provide a voluntary DNA sample, he flatly refused. Right after the interview, police went to his ex-girlfriend. She told them his alibi was a complete lie. He had not been with her that night. During their conversation, investigators learned that James and this woman had a 4-year-old son together. They asked the mother if they could take a DNA sample from the young boy. She agreed. The lab results came back, and it was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. The killer's DNA was a near-perfect paternal match to the child's. This essentially meant that either the boy's father or a very close paternal relative was responsible for the crimes. Now they had him. With this powerful familial DNA evidence, detectives went back to James Biela, but this time it was to arrest him. He was hit with a long list of charges connected to all 3 cases where his DNA had been found. Still, he refused to admit any guilt, maintaining a stoic and defiant silence. As James Biela sat in jail awaiting trial, investigators continued to build their ironclad case. When they spoke with his father, they learned that James had a long history of drug abuse, one of the main reasons he had been dishonorably discharged from the Marines. Detectives also managed to track down the old van he had owned. Forensic testing showed that microscopic fibers from the seat covers were an exact match to fibers that had previously been found on the clothing of the second student who had been kidnapped and assaulted. His former employer had another piece to add to the puzzle. According to him, James Biela quit his job on the very same day that Brianna Denison's body was found, and then he promptly took off for another state. When the trial began, Biela's attorney tried to argue that the cases were not connected, that each crime had a different signature. But those claims held little weight against the prosecution's mountain of evidence, with the undeniable thread of DNA tying James Biela to every single one of them. It certainly didn't help his case that throughout the court proceedings, James often sat smiling and at times even smirking. In late May 2010, just over 2 years after Brianna's murder, the jury found him guilty on all counts. That left the court to decide his sentence, and the death penalty was on the table. Biela's lawyer pushed hard to avoid the harshest punishment, telling the judge about his client's troubled childhood, how his alcoholic father would regularly beat him, and pointing out his good behavior in jail. None of it swayed the judge. James Biela was sentenced to death. A few months later, he picked up 4 additional life sentences for the other charges, meaning that even if his execution never happens, which is entirely possible due to the complexities of capital punishment, he still has no chance of ever walking free. In the years that followed, Biela's lawyers tried several times to overturn the sentence, but each time the state Supreme Court upheld the death penalty. As a result, James Biela remains behind bars on death row, a ghost who will never haunt the streets of Reno again. After his arrest, Brianna's family channeled their unimaginable grief into purpose. They pushed for a new law in Nevada requiring police to collect DNA from anyone arrested for a violent felony crime. They believed that if such a policy had been in place earlier, James Biela would have been caught after his first attack. His DNA entered into the system, and Brianna's life might have been spared. The legislation, known as Brianna's Law, was passed, creating a lasting legacy in her name that could protect countless others. Tragically, Brianna's death was not the last devastating blow to her family. In a cruel twist of fate, exactly 10 years after her murder, her 19-year-old cousin went missing and has never been found. She had told her parents she was going to another state with a man she had recently met, and then simply stopped answering her phone. Her family fears the worst, but still holds out hope that one day they will get answers, that one day she might come home. For a family that has already endured so much, it is a wound that remains painfully open, a second story left without an ending. Well, that concludes today's video. I truly hope this gave you valuable insight into some of the most overlooked cases throughout the years. If you found this helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on notifications to stay updated. Thanks again for your time and support. There's more on the way, so stay tuned.